Okay, so I am going to be talking about building for the page editor. So hopefully, most of you know this already. It's based on it's based on the front-end developer course, which I think a few of you have attended. I see you in the crowd, and also a. Do I sound somewhere different? Here. Also the recommended practice guide that I'm writing for the page editor. So it's a mixture of content. I'm Martina. I work as a technical consulting engineer in corporate, and I spend my time basically faffing around and learning about stuff and then telling everybody else about it. So it's quite a nice job. In this presentation, which will probably be a bit shorter than Drew's, because that's the biggest one, I'm going to talk about project foundations. So what are what's the bare minimum you need to do in order to build for the page editor? A couple of the bonus features that you get if you do build for the page editor and take it into consideration early on in your project. How can you improve the author experience through a mixture of configuration and certain tricks? How can you detect page editor mode and why bother? And finally, as a kind of handover to our next presentation, what about Sitecore MVC? Is there anything hugely different? So to start with, and again, those of you who went to the front-end developer course probably heard me say this about 80 times, it really helps if your design, UX, IA, front-end, project management resource all understand basically how Sitecore puts together a page. And that's just the fact that it's very, very modular. So your page is as you all know, made up of bits, nested sub-layouts, components. And if you've done that, you've pretty much done most of the work, really, just by componentizing. Because Sitecore's marketing features, personalization, testing, all of that stuff relies on you having done this componentization work at the start. And the reason I bring this up is because you can, of course, hardcode sub-layouts, you can Ajax stuff in, I guess. So if you want page editor support, make sure that your pages are modular. The third thing is to make good use of data sources, so bringing in content from elsewhere in your Sitecore tree, and component parameters, which are kind of an overlooked feature of Sitecore quite a lot of the time. So those two in the middle are related. Make sure everything's componentized, and then always go through the field renderer, even if you are doing so by using one of those. So SE text, SE date. If you go through the field, if you go through the field renderer, it will be editable in the page editor. But you can, of course, disable that if you want. So that's pretty much it. That's all you have to do to get the page editor to work. And you don't want to be in a situation where you get to the end of the project and your client goes, can we switch on the page editor? And you go, everything's a static page, and I didn't really think you wanted that kind of flexibility. Sorry. And then you have to rework it, and it's a huge bill, and everybody cries. So those are the basics. And I'll show you that, actually, on our very fancy training site, if the audio doesn't go mental. So this is the training site for some of the newer courses at Sitecore. It's a cycling site where you can book a cycling holiday. And just to give you an idea of how componentized this site is, it's quite an extreme example. I'm going to create a new page in the page editor. There we go, edit mode. Insert a page. Awesome bike. Okay. So the way that this hang on. Can I use the other one? Okay. I don't know if this is working. Is that working? Yeah. Okay. So this page is this implementation is quite excessively componentized. In real life, you'd probably have something a bit more cut down because more often than not, editors get quite confused by all the options they have. But let me just show you. So, this site is split into sort of 3 layers of nesting. So you can insert a bunch of containers, which are just a page container, which is just a giant box with a color on it, a widget container, that's a page container, a widget container above that maybe. There's a widget container, just a slightly different color. You might want to have a gallery somewhere at the bottom, so I'm going to add a gallery container. And within there, you can add additional components. So a general widget, which is just a content block, choose some content for it, and so on. So, and you can move these around, so I can decide on one particular page, I might want this to be at the bottom. I'm going to move it down there. I might change my mind and say, actually, I don't want a 3-column or 2-column, whatever this is, sub-layout anymore. I want 3 columns. So I'm going to change it. So I'm quite drastically changing the look of this page just by using the page editor, and the fact that it's a highly componentized site means that I can be very flexible. That's a blessing and a curse. You might not want your editors to have that much flexibility in the page editor because they could create a mess. And the next part of the presentation is going to focus on what can I do to limit the amount of mess that an editor can create in the page editor, and how can I improve their experience. But as long as you've got a site which is sort of similar to that, in that you kind of take blocks of content and add them to the page, then you're on the right sort of path. I also said, I mentioned some of the bonus features. If you've componentized, then immediately, without any extra work apart from installing analytics, you've got personalization and multivariate testing just instantly. And of course, if you've also componentized, you get caching per component rather than per page, which means that you're not going to want to cache search results, but you might want to cache some static content in the sidebar, for example. So just to show you, on this block here, I select that. Because I've componentized, I've got the personalization button in here, and I've got the testing button in there. There are a ton of things you can do to improve the author experience for them when they're using the page editor. All of them have been implemented on the training site, so I'm going to take you through this list and kind of explain what each one does. All the questions come from here. Rather than going through them all like that, I'll just take the first 3, explain what they are, and then show you what they look like. So you might recognize this. If I add a component, let's see, not that one. Let's add one here, on content. And let's say that wanted a data source. Once I've added my component, I have to go and set my associated content. I have to go and locate it somewhere in the tree. So the margin for user error is huge here. I could accidentally select something that's not going to work, and I can create a massive mess. So that's not very user-friendly. What you can do is you can set the data source location and the data source template. And that means that when I add a component, like this one, for example, which is already got it set up, instantly it's going to prompt me, well, you need to set a data source here, and this is the types you can select, and this is where they're located. Oh, by the way, you want to create a new one. So it's suddenly a lot more helpful. And that's probably the one feature I would definitely set up if you're going to use data sources, because it makes it so much nicer to use. I don't even have to know that there's an item being created in the background. All I know is I push a button and stuff happens, and that's quite nice for an editor. The way that you set that up is on your component definition item, which is what I call any item that is a sub-layout or rendering. Hang on. Here we go. So that component we just added is this. And the data source location and data source template, you just specify there. And you can do that on any component. So that's trick number 1 for making the page editor more usable. The second thing you can do is to take advantage of parameter renderings. So they're my favorite part of Sitecore, really, apart from icons, which is number 1. Parameter renderings is a way to add additional properties to your components once you've added them to the page. So I've seen people, let's say styling. So I've seen people put styling in the content, so in the data source, but then you're limited to having the same look and feel for use from the road on every single page. So a parameter lets you set these properties per instance. So, sorry, I clicked on component. There. Click on more. And then there's this edit component properties button. And the default is that you can add any kind of properties down here, but that relies on the editor going, oh, what was that property that they said that I could specify, and what are my options? So if you're not checking for null and types and all that, they can again cause a huge mess. So we use something called parameter templates, which are a way of letting editors enter properties into each of these components, kind of just as a regular template. So I've put a class drop-down in here, so they can pick a color for their component. They pick orange. They can pick a different heading type depending on where on the page this component is. So if your content is higher up, you might want an H2. If it's lower down, you might want a span instead. To an H4. And they can also change the width. None of this comes with Sitecore, it's just examples of what you might want to do with component parameters. And I have been told this is quite advanced for an editor. They might not think, oh yes, I'm an SEO expert. I understand that a heading impacts how kind of searchable my content is. But it's an option. So I can set those. And suddenly my components changed appearance completely. So I'm keeping all my presentation stuff completely separate from my content, which is my data source. And the way that you do this, so the way that you make it friendly, which is the whole point of this presentation, for an author to choose from, is again on our component definition item, so under sub-layouts, there's this bit called the parameters template. And all that does is it gives you the options to output extra stuff. So here's my template, base widget, class heading width, just like a completely normal template. And then in the code, you have access to these fields or these parameters, and then you can do whatever you like with them. So this is the code for that. No, it's not at all. This is the code. And that's basically just saying, set a public property, because this is web form, sorry, to whatever the parameter is. So this is how you get parameters. So it's just 2 lines, and then you can get your parameter. So in my case, that would be CSS class and width and that sort of thing. But to make that nice for the author, use parameter templates. Pro tip. So next on the list is placeholder settings. You kind of have to use placeholder settings if you want a placeholder to be editable. So that kind of checkered box you get when there's a placeholder on a page, you have to create a placeholder setting in Sitecore so it knows, that's what that means. There is also a web config setting where you can say, actually, I want every single placeholder to be editable even without a placeholder setting. So that's fine. But you can do some nice things for the editor in placeholder settings. So let's go back to this page. If I click on a placeholder and I click add something, it's given me a cut down list. And that's because I've set up some allowed controls in there. And basically what that lets you do is say you can only add this particular component in this particular location, which is good for front-end devs because you don't want to have to make sure that every component is at least going to degrade gracefully in a location. There we go. And the way you do that is on your placeholder settings items, which again is in Sitecore. Probably recognize these. You can specify what your allowed controls are going to be. So it's again a nice way to prevent the editor from going mental and adding components where they really shouldn't. Let's jump to, actually let's go to component thumbnails first. So another thing that I probably didn't draw any attention to was if you add a component, you'll notice that the one on the left just has an ugly icon, which doesn't really mean anything. I don't know how that means sub-navigation. But the one on the right actually shows you the component you're about to add, that one, in context. And the way that you set that up so that you're telling the editor, well, this is the kind of thing you're going to be adding to your page. There we go.
I think that's a waypoint.
I see, a waypoint, okay.
Suggesting you go from one place to another.
Thank you, icon whisperer.
I literally spent half my day on icons alone.
It's so fun. Did you know, this is another fun thing, that there are version 2s in the zips. So there is applications.zip in the themes folder, which has all your icons. And then there's a v2 that doesn't actually get displayed in Sitecore, but you can type in v2 in your icon path, and you get nicer icons. Also, there's a bicycle and a bear. So if you wanted more, there's more. But yes, icons, so screenshots. See all these cool things you learned from me? Again, on your component definition item, where everything is stored, all the friendliness is stored here. There is a field, which I think is a standard field. There we go. Where you can do a thumbnail. And sometimes the take screenshot button works, but it doesn't for me for some reason. And it just means that every time somebody goes to add something, they kind of know what to expect. So they're not mega surprised when they see a hideous icon or something like that. So another way that you can improve the page editor experience. So we've covered 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. And those are kind of the simple, really quick, I hate that phrase, quick wins that you can do to improve the page editor. The others are kind of more in the core database, and they have to do with edit frames, custom experience buttons, so extending the page editor, adding extra buttons that people can click on to make things easier, reduce the amount of trips to the content editor. And one of those is edit frames and custom experience buttons I'll cover in kind of one hit. So I'm going to go to my Find and Book a Holiday page, which is that one. And this content here is coming from a Sitecore index, which means that it's external to the Sitecore database. It's coming from a Lucene index. It's got nothing to do with Sitecore. It's not aware of context in any way. And that means that, predictably, I can't edit it in the page editor because it's not coming from the field renderer pipeline. Look, I can't click on that, even though I've got designing. It's not working. 1 second. So let's say I wanted to give authors the ability to edit some of the content in here. Right now, they would have to go, okay, I've got to remember what that holiday is, I've got to go to the content editor, I've got to find it, and then find the field that I need to edit, and it's just all a bit of a pain. So you can use edit frames and custom experience buttons. Now, I've implemented one here. Here we go. So I've just clicked on this area of the search result, and I get this frame around that content. And it's giving me a little button. I click on that, and it's actually giving me the fields that are available for editing. So I'm getting this called a field editor button. I can select a bunch of stuff, click OK. Because it's in an index, so this stuff actually needs to be updated on save. I do have to save before it'll do anything. But I think it'll change. There we go. So these things are coming from the core database. You can use surround any markup with an edit frame. So you might surround any kind of list where you want people to be able to choose a number of items from a list, or like in this case where you've got a larger component and you want them to be able to kind of see in context what it is they're editing. Because I could put that button around the entire thing, around the entire search result, but then they'd go, well, which bit are you talking about? So that's an edit frame, and that's in the core database. And they're quite easy to set up. No code required at all. Go. So everything to do with the page editor is under Applications and Web Edit, because that's what it used to be called, I think. And you've got these here, edit frame buttons and custom experience buttons. So the one that you saw is this Edit Holiday Details button. And all you do in your markup, I'm just going to go to Visual Studio. Search. In your markup, you surround the area that you want to have that floating toolbar around with an edit frame. So this is an edit frame, around the div. So it says, put an edit frame here. And then in the buttons, on the buttons property, I've said, go and find whatever buttons are in this folder. And I don't know if you can see, but that says, go and find anything in the base__ or -holiday edit folder. There we go. And that's that one. And this button, which is the little globe with a pin in it, it's a field editor button, and it says, open these fields for me, and it'll look at whatever it has been set as its data source, which is the item ID, again done in code. Just scroll. So whatever repeater item you're on, oh, repeaters, disgusting. And so you're given a contextual field editor kind of dialog, and you don't have to go to the content editor anymore. So that's edit frames, custom experience buttons. You can write custom ones that fire off a command, like this one. So that's in the custom experience buttons box. And that fires off a command. There, move up. Those are stored in configurations. You could write your own. You might want to write one that says, delete this component and anything nested within it. Move this component left, right, up, down. You write a class to do that. You configure it, and then you can just create a button to do it.
Martina,
Yes.
with the custom field editors, are you having to find those in two places that plug into this fields?
In two places. This one.
Yeah.
No, it's just there.
Sure.
It's magic. It
I've
works.
got a couple of implementations that not this one. I'm sure you haven't defined that twice.
That sounds wrong to me.
Yeah, possibly.
Yeah.
Can you advance the support?
You mean with these buttons? Yeah. Yeah.
Is that what you mean? That's what it is.
Say there.
I don't know if that's what you mean. It's like
Oh.
you sit on a sub-layer and then...
Let me find out. We're having some kind of chat.
Yeah, so if you're adding a custom button to page into ribbon, you have to define the hyperlinks of list of fields too. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I'll show you tomorrow.
Okay. Okay. Then you should write a blog post about it, so this entire audience can.
I'll add that to my list.
Okay. Okay. Just gonna ask, can you add these to sub-layouts? So yes, you don't have to surround a custom area with an edit frame like that. You can also go, again, to your component definition item, which is my favorite word. Let me go back to it. There we go. Let's go back to the general widget one, which is here. And there is a multi-list there, where you can choose page editor buttons. So if you wanted it around a component rather than around an area that you specified, you can do that there, which means that somebody who doesn't have access to the code could also configure it. Not an editor, someone with admin access, obviously. So on my general widget, I might do a custom button that says edit style, and that could open my parameters. So I don't have to do that click that more button, and it's a little bit more intuitive, so you can kind of go mental with these buttons. And that's pretty much it. I've only really ever found use for the field editor button. I don't know what else you'd want to do that's super important, but it definitely reduces the trips you have to make to the content editor, so you can just stay in the page editor forever. Happy days. You can also, using some buttons in the core database, extend the ribbon, and this is very useful for things like page properties that you don't necessarily see. So metadata, keywords, page title, that sort of stuff. And I've got an example. So very much like I've added some custom buttons to this sort of thing, I've also added a custom tab where you can click edit metadata. And then you can change your page title, keywords, and description, again without having to go to the content editor. You probably, in addition to this, if you are rendering out your page title, you're going to want to set that SC text to actually please don't be editable in the page editor, because it's obviously in the meta, it's going to mess up your HTML. So this is how you want to edit that kind of stuff that you can't see. I've done another one as well, just for fun. Page summary, again, not a field that's actually being displayed on the page, but it's one that bubbles up in other locations. That also is in the core database, so I'm going to go back to Sitecore. Go back to core, and again, it's under web edit. Everything to do with page editor is pretty much in there. Here, all right. Here we go. So under ribbons, there. So slightly different buttons. The easiest thing is just to copy and paste one that already exists. So if you can, I don't know if you can see this or if I can even enhance it, but that button, the metadata button that I've got, all it does is it sends a command, the field editor command, which is what that field editor button is based on, and it says, allow me to edit meta description, meta keywords, and page title when I click that button.
That's what I was looking for.
That one.
I just found it, yeah, if you want to, because that GUID there is the same definition of the field editor item, so if you're extending the ribbon, yeah.
Oh, okay, so it was two different locations, no reuse.
If you don't have that pipe delimited list exactly the same as the list in your field editor, you get a nice little yellow page comes up, tells you all about it. So.
I love that nice yellow page. Okay. So pretty much edit frames, custom experience buttons, enhancing the ribbon, all ways to keep your editors out of the content editor if you want them to be out of the content editor. Anyway. The final thing to talk about, placeholder settings overrides. I have never seen anyone actually use one of these, but a placeholder settings override is, if I give you an example, on this page, there is no there isn't. Find a page where there is one. Okay, let me add a component. I'm not allowed to add a component. Here we go. I'm in the core database, that's why, sorry. If you're in the same browser and you're in the core database, then nothing works because that's your context database. There we go. So I'm going to add a widget container. And because I've set up that placeholder setting with what you're allowed to add to this placeholder, I'm only allowed to put in a general widget. But it may be that for this particular page, you want slightly different rules. So that's where you might want to do a placeholder settings override. And to do that, if I click on this little edit placeholder thing here, it gives me an option that says create a new setting. I say OK. I'm going to call it override. And then I can specify slightly different settings here. So it may be that I want to add the general widget as well as something else. I'm just going to select a few at random. So you can see. So everywhere else on the site, you can add a general widget to that placeholder. But in this particular location, I've decided to override that functionality. And I've got that instead. I think I've already created one. That's why it's showing up these two. It just means that you don't have to go in and do any extra code or use a different placeholder key or mess about with that. You can just do an override, you get a different experience on a different page. And again, the editor doesn't have to go to the presentation details, these guys over here, and try to understand what on earth that means. They can still use the page editor. So most of that stuff doesn't actually require any coding. I've missed off this sort of sample placeholder data. Basically, if somebody hasn't chosen a data source, don't just hide the component, because then they're never going to be able to select it. Give them some kind of content that says, actually, you need to choose a sample. So on this site, for example, we go to home, if I go and delete the data source, because I'm an editor and that's what I do, go and clear this. Maybe because I'm choosing something else. This side actually goes and says, you actually need to add something here. It gives you a little prompt, it's translatable. And I can actually edit this content. Because if I was able to edit that content as an editor, I'd go, okay, I'll just put in my heading and my text and everything's going to be great. But it's forcing you to go and click, okay, fine, go and choose a data source. So another nice way to prompt editors to actually pick some data. If you're not in page editor mode, then that'll just disappear. It's not going to be shown to any visitors. Okay, so again, most of that requires absolutely no programming. It's something that if you are a project manager, you might want to consider adding into your estimate, because it does take a little bit of time to get right. But it improves the product immensely to have this stuff set up. And it's definitely something you should do. Another thing you might want to consider is changing the behavior of your site slightly depending on what page mode you're in. You can detect whether or not you're in the page editor, or in debugging mode, or in preview mode, or everything, either in C# with that, sitecore.context.pagemode, or page modes, I don't really know if that's right, and you'll get a bunch of options. But you can also do it in JavaScript, which I think I've done on this site. If you just have a look and see, does the Sitecore object exist? Does the page modes object exist? Does the page editor object exist? If yes, then do whatever. So that might be an object that you want to pass into a JavaScript module, so it behaves slightly differently if you are in the page editor. One example of that, very quickly, is on this home page. If I'm in preview mode or live mode, it's a scrolling gallery, which is kind of annoying to edit, especially if it's animated automatically. But if I'm in edit mode, then it's stacked. And that's because I've checked in the JavaScript, is it page editor mode, then don't even bother initializing that gallery. There are loads of things you can do with detection like that. You can hide external content like Twitter feeds. No page editor is going to want to see Twitter feeds. They can see that in preview mode. You might want to hide stuff that's kind of on the page but hidden. So form validation messages. You might want to show them. I think I do that on this site actually. This site's pretty great for examples, I've decided. So here, find a book up. Nope, not there. No, not there. Over here on the booking page. So this is preview mode. There's going to be some kind of validation message thing going on here. And if I click edit, they bubble up. So I can see them and I know that that's going to appear. Really good if you're doing any translation work. Even in the content editor, if I were to go and edit this item, I'd still have to remember, there is going to be some label content or some other content coming from a completely different location. By showing it in the page editor, the person doing the translation knows that they have to go and sort that out as well. So all I've done here is, are you in page editor mode? Yes. Show us some extra stuff. Finally, Sitecore MVC, the data definition part, so setting up data source locations and templates, placeholder overrides, all that stuff is identical. It'll work in MVC just as well as it does in web forms. And the whole renderings and data source, all that stuff is the same pretty much. It's actually much easier, I think, in MVC to go and to get the data source and to get the rendering parameters. They're all available. And rather than going through field renderer.render, instead you go through that helper. So html.sitecore.field, and it'll be editable in the page editor as well. So anything you can do in web forms, pretty much, with a small disclaimer in case you find something, you can do from a marketing point of view and a page editor point of view, you can definitely do in MVC as well. And that's it from me. Does anybody have any questions? Edit frame in MVC. I will test it on the train home and tweet about it.
It works.
Who says it works?
Yeah.
It works.
Okay.
I see skeptical eyebrows going, but we'll find out. We'll find out. That's how often those like it. Any other questions or like disagreements about page editor or anything like that? Does anybody use the page editor?
Question.
Yeah.
Standard values.
Yeah. Can you edit standard values in page editor? I don't think so. Not out of the box or easily.
Yeah.
So how do you mean? I suppose so. Yeah. If you want to do that. So maybe add a little button here that says edit standard values or something, or something in there that I guess you'd have to make it a bit like a custom class that goes and gets your standard values item, but suppose, yeah.
It's something I run across a lot and I wish I could do.
Should do that then. Should do it and then write a blog post about it and send it to me. So the question was, can you edit standard values in the page editor? You can, probably. You could add, we just discussed, add a little button up there to say edit the standard values of this page or edit the standard values of this component or something, and have some kind of class that goes and fetches your standard values for you. So you could do that. Any other questions before we have a beer and tiny pie break?
Can you do one
multivariate testing and personalization when you're using the parameter template.
Ah, so do you mean can you vary them?
Yes.
I don't think so. I don't think so.
Well, I know you couldn't.
Yeah.
It's like for 7, but
I don't think it's any different in 7.2. So the question was, when the way that you vary, for those of you who don't spend every day with Sitecore like we do. So when you do a test or when you personalize, there you go. I'm going to click the personalization button, and my options in here are either you can change the data source. So if somebody has shown an interest in bikes for kids or something, you might want to show them different content. You can either personalize the content, so there's a button here. So you're essentially changing the data source to something else. Or you can hide the component, or you can change the component that's actually displaying. So the question was, can you also change the parameters? I don't think you can based on this, but it would be cool to see some kind of magical thing that does.
The problem you have with that is that your code behind would have to be generic enough to take 2 different versions, and the person that was checking the premise
I wonder, does this personalization thing, does it listen to placeholder settings? Do you know? So is this going to show me just, oh, it does. So I guess you could make sure that the rendering parameters for whatever is available are the same? I don't know. Don't know.
Yeah, for layout.
And you can find that out of the box? No, I guess is the answer to that question. But you can, it's Sitecore's platform and you can build whatever you like. Any other questions about PageEditor? No? Right, beer and pie time then. Thank you.
Thank you.